And so we come to the 8th unit of the Old Testament overview, and it's simply the exile. These are the 70 years that Jeremiah prophesied in Jeremiah 25. It would be the length of the exile. And we have during this time the prophet Daniel, Ezekiel, and we could also add that Jeremiah, because he was also speaking into this particular period of time. And it's from around about 605 to 539. Now, people would use different dates. They would maybe started at 586 to when the temple was dedicated. That also is 70 years, but this is the period of the exile. There's a map of the location. You can see how the people would have taken many months to get there, walking, and it would have been a very terrible experience being marched to this different part. They would have been very displaced, and it would have been really terrible. But that there is the location of the exile. So the impact is that Israel lost everything. The covenant with Moses had been broken, and indeed the covenant with David. They had lost the land, they had lost the temple, and there was no king on the throne. But as I'd mentioned in the previous slide, the prophets were preparing them for a new future, that there would be restoration, there would be a coming back to the land and a rebuilding. And the prophets that were really significant in this was Jeremiah, in Jeremiah 29, even after the group had left in 597 BC, that was when Ezekiel went. He wrote a letter to those in exile telling them that despite the prophecies of some that they would be home in 2 years, that they would not, and that they should settle down and build their homes and give their children in marriage and pray for the welfare of the city. In other words, make it their home. Settle down because you're not coming home soon. And that is in fact what they did. Ezekiel speaks about how the glory of God is going to depart. So even as in 1 Kings chapter 8, the glory of God fills the temple, you get this sad portion in Ezekiel 11, how the glory departs from the temple, and it's simply an empty shell. And Ezekiel talks about how there will be a break, a delay in the Davidic line, but there's that hope that a new shepherd is going to come, and not a shepherd like the kings of Israel in the past, so many of them who've been bad shepherds, but a good shepherd would come. Daniel has visions that indicate that God's purposes for Israel have not finished, and he speaks words that are going to indicate that God is sovereign over the nations, and the period, the centuries that are going to come, that Israel will experience, they can know that God is with them and in control. One of the most special words for this period of time is the second part of Isaiah, Isaiah 40 following. Now this portion, Isaiah 40 through 66, was prophesied by Isaiah in the 8th century, but remarkably the setting and the time frame for this prophecy was this period. I've said when I've taught this passage that it is good to read Lamentations, and then when there's a grieving and a brokenness over the destruction of Jerusalem and the fall of Judah, and then read Isaiah 40, where are these words of comfort that are spoken out by the prophet. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that she has served her term, that her penalty is paid, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. And in this first part of the second part of Isaiah 40 following, what you get are words of comfort and love to this broken people. You get Israel many times being called my servant. You're my servant, God says. I love you. I've not cast you off. Do not fear. I will help you. And I will bring you from the nations. And there's words of recommissioning Israel to their destiny as being a light to the nations, something that God had always intended. And in Isaiah, in these passages, 40 through 66, we see these passages that are not talking about Israel as the corporate servant, but as an individual. There would be this servant figure emerge, and among those things he would do would be to suffer. And through his suffering, many would be made righteous. And in 61, this same person will be anointed, and the Spirit of the Lord would anoint him to preach good news. And so we see that in this passage of Isaiah, hope for the future, comfort for a broken people, but God had great plans for the future. And so as we think of this meta-narrative and the fulfillment of these wonderful prophecies, what we see is that the Gospels in the New Testament pick up these different themes and relate them to Jesus. Jesus is that perfect Israelite. He is the one who keeps the law perfectly, who fulfills the word, the prophetic words in his own person. We see in the Gospels how Matthew and Luke especially portray Jesus as the rightful heir to the throne of David. Luke chapter 1, the prophecy of the angel that the son that is going to be born to Mary will sit on the throne of his father David, and of his kingdom there will be no end. Matthew begins with the genealogy showing that the son of Joseph, the adopted son of Joseph, has the legal authority, the legal right to the royal line. And so he is this resurrection of the line of David, this stump of Jesse that will bring forth a branch. But also he's portrayed as the servant of Isaiah, that servant figure who would come and indeed give his life and be that sheep that goes to the slaughter as dumb, and that through him many were made righteousness. And indeed, through Jesus and those he ministered to, we see in the book of Acts the nations being reached, even as Israel becomes a light to the nations, as Jewish people are saved. As we see on the day of Pentecost, it was Jews who were saved, and these were the ones who scattered and preached the good news to the Gentiles.